Hey, good morning, girl. How are you doing today? It's a pleasure to be here. I'm here. I hope you're doing well. It is the 25th of March, 2019, and I'm going to touch a little bit on something that I've talked about before, and it's what I call the central problem of life, really, and how to overcome it. So I already addressed in the past the thing that I think is most important, and that is, what happens when a person runs up against an obstacle. They want something, something, some piece of information that is uh, not suiting their expectations. What do they do next? Do they go around? Do they go over or under it? That really the fundamental problem in life is sort of, what do you do when you're beset with an obstacle? How do you handle that from a mindset standpoint? And so I'm going to talk about something very similar, and it's essentially just another way of looking at this problem, and it has to do with this idea of needs, um, and sort of like the reality that many times in life, um, we don't get our needs met as human beings. I mean, there's almost this assumption that needs that we have need to be met. And, I'm talking about this situation about where we experience an obstacle and, how we manage, in the face of that obstacle where we can't get what we want. And one of the facts of life is that everyone, pretty much everyone I know, has a single problem, a main problem, and that is they want something. And no matter how much they push or pull in life, they're not getting it. And and they basically, a lot of the time what happens is that people become frustrated or angry or sad, and what happens quite often is they act in dysfunctional ways or in ways that are under self undermining. And of course, that doesn't work. They still don't get what they want. and um, and here's the main problem: people believe that if they don't get what they want, that they can't be happy, that they can't be satisfied, that they can't live a meaningful life, that they can't be successful. And I'm here to say that you can be happy despite not getting what you want. I'm here to say that you can be successful, you can be satisfied, you can live a life of meaning, even if you don't get what you want. And here's the reason: the reason is that life is. Um, Life is elaborate. Life is complex. How should I say? Life is multifaceted. It's the in a way, life is compartmentalized. How should I say it? I'm still figuring this out for myself, but I think when the fundamental problem of human beings is that pretty much 100% of the time we all run into something that we want and can never have. Whether it's, there are people who get cancer and they want health again, perfect health again. Well, many of them will never get it. There are people who have children, but those children get sick and die, and they want these are people who want their children back, and they'll never get it. I have friends who have children who are developmentally disabled. I have friends who have children who they've lost in death. I have friends who've had parents who've died. And what I notice in them is their continual, daily, even hourly struggle to deal with those facts of them not getting what they want. And they sincerely let me know about what it is they want and how they're not getting it. I think this is the central problem in life. Fact is that for all of us, I mean, everyone that I know of on the planet has at least one thing that they want, that they're struggling to get. And you know what? Some people will get a part of those things, but would say the clear majority, even if they get a part of one thing, there is something that they want that they will never get, no matter how much they want it. I mean, if you think about the book The Secret, you know, that book is a wish. It's what is it that I can do to get the things that I want? You may not be familiar with the book The Secret, but it's about it's about sort of manifesting what it is you want. And that's really a different subject, but the subject I'm talking about is there's this idea that's sort of packed into having needs at all, and what human beings need to do in order to and it's deeper than that. It's just this idea that you need to get what you want. Now, I've come to realize that what human beings need is a subjective evaluation. Basically, as human beings, we just decide what we need, and we go from there. And it's in a way, that's part of the failing of this whole problem, and that is that we're not, that what human beings want and need and desire is essentially our choice. And quite often we choose goals that are impossible to obtain. Yeah, I wrote some notes here about what I wanted to do. So here's this idea. The idea is that you do not need your needs to be met in order to feel happy, in order to feel satisfied, in order to feel successful, in order to love your life, in order to feel fulfilled. And so what happens, despite this, let's say, how do we deal? Really, it's how we deal with the fact that we're not going to get what we need. Well, I think quite often what happens, that one of the first things we do is we place a duty on ourselves. Like, if I'm going to achieve my need, I'm going to set this duty upon myself to get what I want. And another thing that we'll do is we'll set a duty on somebody else. Oh, we're going to have them get what I want. Maybe it's a romantic partner. Only they can give me what I want. This happens a lot in when it comes to intimacy and connection. Really, it's about the other person, right? Particularly in a romantic partnership, you're expecting that the other person somehow will get you what you want. There's another tactic that we use. We basically pretend that we don't want what we want. In the face of not being able to get it, we'll decide, well, I really don't like this state of wanting and not getting. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide that I'm going to pretend that I don't want it, or at least I'm going to ignore it. I'm not going to put a lot of energy into the wanting of it, and that's going to solve the problem. And actually, that works pretty well as a sort of a technique to be less disappointed. And it works to some extent, but quite often, even if you decide to put less emphasis on it, you may still want it. um, and then there's another avenue that people take, a fourth avenue, and that is a kind of acceptance. You want it, and in a way you acknowledge that you're never going to get it, and in a way somehow put it to rest. And that's probably one of the most healthy things, ways to deal with it. I think there's really the solution is this recognition that life is multifaceted. Let's say I really wanted chocolate ice cream. I mean, I really wanted chocolate ice cream at the ice cream shop. Now, it may be the case that there are 30 other flavors of ice cream available. There's vanilla and chocolate chip, Rocky Road, orange sherbet. But of course, I don't want those. I want chocolate and milk. Let's say they're out of chocolate ice cream. They just don't have it. There's nothing that I can do, nothing that the ice cream shop can do to get me chocolate ice cream. That's really the central problem in life. And so how do you cope with that? Well, the idea is that life is multifaceted. The human brain is a parallel processor, and it can hold two ideas side by side. It can hold the idea that you're not going to get chocolate ice cream and that you can be happy anyway. You might be happy by having nothing. You might be happy by having vanilla ice cream. But here's the solution to the problem of not getting what you want or not getting what you need. It's really just sort of recognizing and deciding that you can be happy despite not getting what you want, even if you really, really want it. Even if you desperately want something, you can still be happy. You can still enjoy your life. There are other facets to enjoy. Now, how many facets of life are there? Here's where the multifaceted idea comes in. There's an infinite number of facets of life. For example, I could become a biologist and devote my life to the study of ants, or I could become a chef and devote my life to cooking. So that's really what life is about. It's about how to handle what happens when there's an obstacle that is impenetrable, and it's about refocusing. So that's really the secret of life. It is about a refocusing. You may still want what you want for the rest of your life, but you can refocus and be happy, despite not getting what you want. You can want it without having it. They can live side by side. You want this thing, and you may never get it. So I wanted to mention that the jail cells, the prisons, are filled with people who have pushed and pulled to get what they want. Now, on some level, that's very admirable. But they've used force or fraud or trickery to get what they want, or to prevent something they didn't want from happening. They really wanted or didn't want something to happen. And they tried to sort of work beyond the rules. In a way, you could imagine them as being courageous. But of course, like I mentioned, the jails are filled with people who were pushed and pulled to get what they wanted. A lot of the reason is because they thought that would be the only way that they could be happy, the only way that they could be satisfied and fulfilled. I'm willing to bet that at least 80% of the people who pushed and pulled to get what they want did never get what they want. I might even say that 100% of the people in jail who pushed and pulled to get what they want never got what they want. I mean, I think that in some ways probably true. Whatever it was, their heart's desire. I mean, they may have gotten it for a moment. Let's say they really wanted, say, $10,000 from the bank. They may have obtained that $10,000 from the bank for about 5 minutes. But they didn't get what they want in the sense that they didn't, I don't know. It didn't take long for their life to fall apart afterwards. And I would guess that the majority of people never even got what they want. And here's the thing about life. Sometimes it's impossible to get what you want. It just is. Human beings, we set up our lives in ways where quite often it's impossible to get our heart's desire. Anyway, let's see what other point it is I wanted to convey. So, you do not need your needs to be met. It's a fundamental lie in the world. You do not need your needs to be met. Now, there is another aspect of that question, and it has to do with, say, Maslow's hierarchy, the need for food, shelter, water, clothing, security, safety. You definitely need those things to stay alive. That's true. But, and I'm not really talking about those things. I'm talking about, sort of goals that people set for their lives, things that help make them feel successful. Well, anyway, I might have extinguished this subject, but I do think that it is probably the number one issue in life. In fact, yesterday I went to a presentation, an open mic discussion, it was an open mic event in Santa Barbara where people played music and they wrote poetry, and pretty much every source of, say, drama or every point in the story was how they dealt with not getting what they want. Like there was a man who was struggling with not being coupled in a romantic relationship. There was another one where really just every piece of art in some way sort of expresses this story about what it is to not get what you want. And quite often the response is to accept it and decide to seek out something else. That's probably one of the most healthy ways to cope with not getting what you want. It doesn't, and if you don't get what you want, it doesn't have to color the rest of your life. It doesn't have to, and quite often it will, particularly if you really want it. One point I wanted to make was this idea about, where do these wants come from? Here's the thing. I think quite often what happens is we make them up. Our society as children, we are indoctrinated by our culture about, and we could come up with ideas about how we think the world ought to be. You know, um, I grew up quite religious, and so a lot of my ideas about the ideal are wrapped up in sort of what I'd call religious ideals. These are ideals passed down through the centuries from parent to child and so on. And, of course, the context changes, reality changes. And what happens is that those values they're just old fashioned, you know, and they don't apply in new contexts. Things have changed so much, like the nuclear family, and you know, relations are changing between old and young, and relations are changing between workers and employers. There are ideals that exist out there. There's even ideals about the state of the environment, right? And I'm talking about in terms of climate change and how, you know, we'll never get back to that point where where nature is this, or nature was what it was 100 years ago. I mean, climate change has just been so dramatic, and already the ecosystems have changed in such a dramatic way that there's no way we're ever going to get back to that point where we have all the original species. You know, in a way, it's about coping with loss, right? There are ideals, there are things that we want, desire, wish for, and dream. I mean, we're just never going to get that back. And, is it possible for people to be happy and live successful lives? I guess my message is one of optimism, and that it is possible, and that it's that multifaceted part of life. It's that parallel processing brain that we have. We can have them side by side. We can have mass global extinction side by side with um, being engaged and living an enjoyable life. We can hold both those things at the same time in our brains. I know it may not seem possible, but it's true. The same is true with political upheaval and political strife. We can have um, chaos in political systems and be happy at the same time. It's the same with animal welfare. Human beings in this world, there can be suffering, human suffering, animal suffering, and we could be happy at the same time. See, it almost seems like a central contradiction, but it's true. It's just a fact of our brains and our makeup and our psychology. It's possible. I guess that's my message of optimism to you, Emily, that there are people who deeply, deeply want environmental health. They want to reduce or eliminate suffering of animals. And, these wants and desires are virtuous, they're courageous, important. I'm not taking away from what makes them important or makes those ideals necessary. In fact, they are. I totally agree that they are completely necessary. There are people who want connection in their relationships with their brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, with the community at large. And here's the thing, that for a great majority of people, they will never achieve it to in at least the idealistic way that they've envisioned. And I want to say that it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. even if it may not seem that way. I read the stories in the news about young people in particular who fall victim to depression and anxiety. And I want to say that I've been there myself, and I've defeated both those states as well. I've overcome them. And so it makes perfect sense to me that a lot of people are sort of moving along that same path. And that's the media environment is such, the thought environment, the meme environment is the same, where depression, anxiety, suicide, all those things are probably more prone to happen in society in the next coming years, and even more prone to happen than as it exists today. So I just want to say that there's a way out. A lot of it has to do with where you focus your attention. And anyway. Oh man, I must be feeling tired or something this morning. I'm not sure. This is a really important subject. This subject, because it besets us all as human beings. It's really the human condition. And anyway, I wanted to give you some instruction. I wanted to give you some insight into the world. That I don't know that there is something that you really, really want or need that you're not getting. But I assume that state exists in you right now, because basically in everyone I know, that is the case. And I'm really not even sure what it is you might really be having a desire for. But I just want to give you some hope, some optimism about the fact that you can live a good life despite not getting what you want. One of the things that I really, really want is myself, me, is I want to have a enjoyable relationship and a close relationship with my daughter. I'm slowly coming to the grips with the fact that probably won't ever happen. And and so that's perfectly okay. I just want to acknowledge the okayness of it. I want to acknowledge it for myself, and I want to acknowledge it for you. And see, here it is. Here's what it is. This is an idea that was elucidated many years ago by one of my heroes of psychology. He came up with rational emotive behavioral therapy, and the concept was frustration tolerance. And this whole idea is that frustration tolerance is really the key to mental health. And what that means is that human beings, really the key to mental health is basically this, is it a willingness? It's a capacity. If you have this capacity to be infinitely tolerate frustration, that is essentially what I'd call the pinnacle of mental health. You've reached the standard, whatever that standard is. And this frustration tolerance, I'm calling frustration tolerance a virtue. And I think it's one of the most essential virtues to being a human being. And really, that's, if you look at like in fiction and nonfiction and stories like that, the hero is essentially, well, first of all, in fictional stories, certainly the hero gets what he wants at the end of the story. Like they fall in love happily ever after. But again, that's fiction. What the reality is that pretty much all the time the person doesn't get what they want. And that's okay. That's the happily ever after part. You know, frustration tolerance as a virtue is what I'm talking about. This idea of, if you think about romantic relationships instead of like being passive aggressive, all, and maybe even just being aggressive in romantic relationships, that of course is the singular problem in relationships. The fact, here's the singular problem in relationships is that, just before you're coupled, there's this hope that another person will satisfy your needs. And initially, it appears that they do. When the relationship begins, it may be the case for years and years, 2, 3, 4 years, that your mate satisfies your needs. But I think people just begin to realize over time, as they become accustomed to having their mates around in this coupled state, that what happens is they end up taking their mate for granted, and the things that they wanted, they don't want as much anymore. They end up needing other things, and they realize that more and more often they come to recognize that their mate can't help them get what they want anymore. They can't help them. They can't get what they need from their mate anymore because their mate doesn't do this. They'll fall into blaming and judgment. And this is basically the story of relationship, and it's continual. That's why people cycle through relationships, serial monogamy. People decide what they want. Oh, I want this person, and then 4 to 7 years, 10 years later, they decide, oh, I want something else. And maybe they got what they wanted, but perhaps it was incomplete. They didn't get completely what they wanted, or maybe they're hopeful they can get something, get their needs met more fully some other way, maybe even through freedom and not having a relationship at all. It's really the central struggle in relationships, and that is getting your needs met, right? What I'm here to say is that you really don't need to get your needs met, that they are primarily subjective evaluations. So long as they're not part of what I'd call objective Maslow's hierarchy type needs: food, drink, water. I mean, we all need food, drink, clothing, shelter, and safety. And if we absolutely don't have that, let's say we're in a war-torn region, then basically we'll die because we are vulnerable to that. And sometimes that happens necessarily because of events in our situation, right? Our current context. And there may not be anything we could do about it. People get sick and have cancer or get heart disease, and they're basically stuck on this spiral where their health declines and they die eventually. So I guess I'm not really talking about that. I mean, that really is, well, in some ways I am talking about that, although it does matter whether you get those needs met, because basically it's life or death. But in this conversation, I'm not talking about those life or death needs. I'm talking about subjective needs and happiness, satisfaction, fulfillment, and meaning. Because really eventually we'll all sort of have to deal with the lack of the Maslow's hierarchy needs as we grow old and get sick and die. But I'm talking about just regular old living life. And, basically I'm giving you hope that the fact is you don't have to get what you want. It's kind of interesting how we're all, as human beings, we're suckered into this idea that we need money, we need connection, we need and we need these things from other people or from ourselves. Fact is, I wouldn't call those things needs. I would call them preferences, maybe desires, wishes. And it's wonderful if we can achieve those things. And I would say, maybe some of the time we're successful, but I would think for a lot of people, even if people say have lots of money, they may not ever achieve, say, connection with another person. And it may not have anything to do with the people around them. Maybe it's their own personality. Maybe they. In fact, I know a few people who deeply desire human connection, and at the same time, continuously choose not to connect with other people. There's like this fundamental contradiction in their life, something that they desperately want in their lives, and yet also can't recognize. There's something about their minds, their attention, their consciousness, their development. I'm not sure what it is. And it happens really frequently that somehow these are people who just can't see the prize that's right in front of them. In fact, I think that's true most of the time. I heard a story last night. There was a man who owned a farm. And I don't know if this story is real or not real, but I'm going to try to relate it as best as I can. So this man, he owns a farm. He wants to be rich. He hears about people finding diamonds in Africa, and he actually travels to Africa and looks for diamonds, and he sells his farm. But he dies a poor man because he never finds the diamonds that he wanted. He never finds the wealth that he wanted. Turns out, though, that the farm that he originally owned had a kind of black diamond on it, worth millions of dollars, and he just didn't recognize it. That story serves as metaphorically true in the sense that there are things that we value that are present in our lives that are extremely valuable that we just take for granted. Like I talked about this before, like my hands and my arms, my brain. I mean, how valuable is my brain? Is it worth $1 million? Yeah. Is it worth $1 billion? Oh yeah, that's right. If I had a choice between my brain or having $1 trillion in my pocket, which would I choose? Well, my brain. I have infinite wealth. If you take my brain into consideration, say my hands or arms, easily tens of millions of dollars worth of value to me. I wouldn't exchange my arm for $10 million. There's value and wealth in our lives almost inherently. And the idea that people are seeking after wealth, like it's the one thing and only thing, is almost laughable when they have infinite wealth already, right? There's another aspect to which there are a lot of people who want love, but the fact is, and they look for love externally, right? They're on these dating apps. They get married many times. I don't know. How about this? How about there are people who are in monogamous relationships? They want love so much that they'll stay in a dysfunctional relationship for 30, 40 years. They're shooting for, they think for them that love will be possible for them if they stay in a relationship long enough. There's this idea of lifelong commitment that exists. Well, here's the thing. Our mind is a love factory. Our emotions are generated by us in our own minds. And it doesn't make any sense to look for love externally through couplehood or through getting married. Because really all the love that we'll ever feel is generated in our own minds through the various kinds of meaning that we make through our stories, through our narrative. And in a way, that's actually the deeper reason why we don't get what we want, even though we desperately want it. It's because it's the narrative. Everything turns on the narrative. Our story about the way we want the world to be. In a way, it's kind of our decision. So it's really, this message is an encouraging message. In a way, human beings, we construct our own reality. And quite often, the kinds of reality that we construct through our own narrative and meaning making is this idea that we want something and we're never going to get it. And you know what? The fact is it's true. A lot of people want to live forever. They want $1 million. There's a lot of things people want. People want beautiful homes. They want kitchens. They want lots of plants. They want bay windows. Maybe they want amazing relationships with their children or with their spouse or with their parents. But, for circumstances, who knows what the circumstances in the context are? People's stories that they tell themselves, those stories just won't let them get what they want. Or reality won't let them get what they want. Here's the thing. People generally are powerless in the world. I know it's hard to accept. And it's wonderfully romantic that there are a lot of stories out there inspiring others to be courageous and be brave and take steps to get what they want. But the fact is that, at least in my view, is that human beings are less powerful than we think we are. In fact, I've spoken about this question on a few occasions. If you think about it from the perspective of determinism, human beings are essentially powerless in our environment. As a physicist, I understand that the world operates in a clockwork fashion according to formulas, right? It's about concentration gradients. Pretty much life is about energy exchange, conservation of energy. Extremely impersonal things that are happening in reality that sort of in a clockwork way move us all forward. And there's nothing that human beings can do about it. Our brain, in fact, I think it's our consciousness, our psychology creates this idea of continuity, creates this idea that we have free will. It's extremely convincing, but it is an illusion. In fact, that's probably a strong contributor to the fact that we want things that we'll never get. The fact is it's our powerlessness in the face of determinism, our powerlessness in the face of molecules and atoms as they reach lower energy states. And that I think that probably is a big part. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons why people don't get what they want. There's a lot of reasons why people don't get what they need. Some of them have to do with physical reality and our powerlessness in the face of it through determinism. Uh, Other things have to do with psychology and how our brain creates narratives about and meaning, and about how our brain focuses on the negative and doesn't allow, doesn't recognize or deem important things that are good. A lot of it is the hedonic treadmill and how we just take for granted the things that the extremely valuable things that we have, like our own minds or our own arms. So there's all these forces: determinism, psychology, hedonic treadmill, that keep human beings from getting what we want. And so this is a perennial problem. And it's almost a rule that in general, human beings won't get what they want. They won't they won't get what they need. And our society is built on this fact. Here's the funny thing. Our society is essentially built on this myth, built on I think probably the most fundamental myth that our society is built upon is this idea that things are true. Now, as a physicist and a scientist, I understand that there is an objective reality out there. And as a psychologist, I understand that our conception of what's real is a completely subjective evaluation. So I acknowledge that there's an objective reality. And at the same time, I acknowledge that people understand it in a totally subjective way. So my point, what's my point? My point is that despite the fact of an objective reality that life is subjective, and despite the fact that there is a foundation of truth in the world through the clockwork of physics and chemistry, the fact is that nothing is true, at least from a human standpoint and on our psychology. And that is also a point where, there's this fascination with truth and all that goes along with it, right? Say the necessity, it's necessary that my friends believe the same thing I do. It's important that my friends believe in the truth. It's important that I accept the truth and that I believe in the truth and that the truth matters. No. These are all myths, regrettably. The fact is that nothing is true. When I say the sky is blue, that is a wonderfly heartwarming, old time religion idea. But it's actually also not true. I know it seems contradictory when I say it, but I'm asking you to look sort of outside of the common way of looking at it. The fact is that the sky is many colors, and in fact, also no color at all. If I look at one point in the sky, at times it could be nighttime. Maybe there's a red star in that particular patch. A lot of it depends on your perspective. There are other aspects in which the sky isn't blue. If you recognize the fact that blue is just a wavelength that enters the retina, which gets transduced into chemical symbols, synapses, and blue is completely an imagination. It's completely, that color is just sort of a concoction of our brain and psychology. It's just a sort of an imagined color. Blue doesn't exist really. I don't know how many nanometers the wavelength of the color blue is, but whatever blueness is like a fabrication of our brain. In the same way that our brain convinces us that we have free will, our brain convinces us that there's the color blue. And uh, these basically our brain sort of manufactures this world that we live in. And our brain has certain biases. Our brain has confirmation bias. That has to do with this idea that truth exists. False idea. I recognize that at the foundation of reality, it's true, but from a psychological perspective, it isn't. So, yeah, my point is that that basically nothing is true. I was talking about the confirmation bias. Yeah, there's a lot of biases. There's a lot of illusions and biases in our human psychology. And, it's just how evolution has sort of scraped together this consciousness, this what I'd call emergent quality. It's just the way evolution has scrapped together this brain of ours and our own particular consciousness. And it's wonderful. What a wonderful illusion we have in front of us. This amazing journey that we're all on. It's miraculous and valuable and amazing. And in a very important way, false. And you know what? That's okay. We can be happy and enjoy what we have. And, the fact is, like I was mentioning earlier, life is multifaceted. The fact is that you can still be happy despite the fact that you're not getting what you want, despite the fact you live in a war-torn region and you've lost your family in death or sickness. The fact that you're a disabled quadriplegic, or if you have a debilitating mental illness. Still, this is the optimism of my point. Beyond all that, you can live a happy, enjoyable, meaningful, fulfilled, successful life. And that's my main point. I just thought it was important to let you know about it. Because a lot of people are struggling and coming to terms with these ideas. It's continual. And I'm just happy to know about it and to be able to pass it down to you, father to child, to help you recognize the truth of it and the way out of it, right? The way out of the conundrum. At least partially the way out of the conundrum. Hopefully I've been able to present to you a problem and a solution. The problem is pretty much something you won't be able to do anything about, because it's sort of like the makeup of our reality, our psychological reality, our narrative. It's just the way it is. You're going to want things you'll never get. Full stop. In fact, it doesn't matter how much you want them. You're not going to get them because of your narrative, how powerless you are in the face of determinism. And it's okay. You could still feel secure and happy in the world. You could still be a quadriplegic and live a meaningful life. See, that's the optimism, right? It's balanced. I mean, you're still never going to get what you want. You're still never going to achieve what you value. The goals that you have, there's a chance you'll get some of what you want, a Pyrrhic victory, and I'm so happy for that. And there's even a chance you'll get exactly what you want, but even if you do, you'll become accustomed to it, adapt to it through the hedonic treadmill, and decide you want something else desperately. And it's just the way of our psychology, right? The human brain focuses on things we don't have. It's just what the human brain does. And so essentially, I had a friend, she said, life is disappointing. And you know what? In many respects, she's right. And so I want to give you a tool to sort of help you understand that despite that fact, despite life will never measure up to what you want, that your father won't ever measure up to what you want him to be, and nor will your mother, nor will your own body, which what even if you have the illusion that you can control, you really can't. You know, this is just reality. And I guess I'm here as your dad to tell you that it's okay. That life is sufficiently multifaceted, that the parallel processor can have this idea of your brain, can have these ideas that can hold both these ideas at the same time. The fact is, you can be, you can be in a state where you don't get what you want, and you can be happy at the same time. I guess that's probably the most. That you could be powerless in the world and still feel powerful. That it's almost a terrible contradiction. That there could be truth in the world, and at the same time, nothing is true. Maybe this is what Zen Buddhism is all about. I get a sense that, oh yeah, this is what Zen Buddhism is about. Like the cones, right? These cones are stories that appear to have contradictions, and they're fascinating to contemplate, and they lead to insights and enlightenment. And I guess that's part of what I'm providing today. I'm providing this cone that I hope will be transformative for you. It's essentially a description of the way things are, and it's a recognition that you'll feel terrible sadness, anger, emotional pain, that there will be tragedy in your life, and at the same time, there are opportunities to be transformed by it and be made better and more perfect. And that's where it's at. So I know it took me an hour to talk about it, but it is probably the most critical piece of information I've ever provided to you through this mode of communication. And I want to let you know that I love you deeply, and I'm committed to you and our relationship. And I'm here to support you in whatever ways you decide you want me to support you. And whatever ways that I personally acknowledge that I can support you. And to the best of my ability. And I just want to say that I hope you have a wonderful day today, and a wonderful week, and a wonderful month, and a wonderful year, and a wonderful life. And I'll talk to you later as soon as I can. All right? Bye-bye, my love. Peace.